in that.
was
I
like,
thought,
is that a trick
"I'm
question,
silly,
or?"
really sorry, I'm not sitting there. Because I was never quite that. Oh. I was a
be
wuss
great.
compared to Gretchen. Yeah, wasn't it great? That was great. He got as red as his shirt. I loved it.
I told
I
her
was
she
so
could email them to me last month.
sick of 'em.
I'm just thinking,
No.
she emailed me all this.
When you were doing that, though,
It's all right.
I want to reverse my
No,
decision
no,
now.
no.
Well, and I'll tell you straight up why I said to level it. We were told 3 years ago that Crumbly that nobody should even step
She might, at least, yeah.
theory of construction.
But
And
that,
what can we do with it?
that never came out in a public way. I mean, you may have heard that, but a lot of others didn't. And nobody's gonna spend a dime on this. But at least you're giving them the option. And then everybody will back off.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll tell you,
Call the Planning and Zoning Meeting, Commission meeting for Monday, July 9th, 2018 to order. Roll call, please.
Tony Gilgenbach,
Here?
Mark Hydrich,
Aye.
Mark Fleesner,
Here?
Mark Piontek,
Here.
Tom Holtmeyer,
Here.
Sandy Lucy, John Borgman, Chuck Watson,
Here.
Samantha Sue Rudy Wacker,
here,
Carolyn Witt,
here.
Sal Maniaci.
Here.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the June 11th, 2018 meeting.
Motion to approve?
Second?
First and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to case number 180602, annexation. David Campstrader, applicant, is requesting voluntary annexation of an approximate 16.8 acres of land. Also, item number 4 is in conjunction with this, sort of.
Yes.
Case number 180607, Little Elm LLC, applicant is requesting to rezone 132 South Old Pottery Road from R1A Single Family to R3 Multifamily, parcel ID 10725.00035.033.000. Sal,
All right, so I have the same presentation from last month. This was continued. It was originally 4 requests. The first 2 were tabled, but just a refresher. The first one is a request to annex approximately 16.8 acres of land off of Highway 100 and South Old Pottery Road, those 2 highlighted parcels there. The request is also to bring them into the city limits under R3 multifamily residential. They currently, the westernmost parcel does have frontage along South Old Pottery Road. The southeastern parcel does not currently have access to right-of-way. That is not a requirement to be annexed. That's a requirement for subdivision development in the future. So when they come in with a plan, that's when we'd comment on layout and access, stormwater management. All of that is done later when they actually come in with a detailed proposal. If you remember the parcels, well, here's the surrounding zoning. Let me do that first. So there is, to the north along South Old Pottery, R1A single-family residential. These 2 parcels directly to the north were rezoned last month and approved by council to C2 general commercial to match this development, the Highland Meadows development. And this property in the middle that is not, as part of this request, is also owned by the applicant. And we do show in our master plan as commercial in the future. So we would assume that this development, when I say assume is how we have it planned in the master plan. We would like a connection from Pottery Road to the High Street extension. We do an east-west connection here. It would cut through this property here ideally. But again, we can't necessarily comment on connections and access until we see a proposal. And you want me to go through to the second one, or you want to discuss this one first?
do you guys want to discuss or just do both? Do both.
Yeah, I'll go through because that way it's still, the next request is a rezoning of this parcel adjacent to both, kind of filling in the gap. So these 2, again, were the two that were rezoned last month. And then this parcel here is requested to be rezoned to R3 multifamily to match what's being requested to be brought in. So from staff's viewpoint, we are recommending approval of this. I understand we don't have a specific proposal yet. By the city code, we do not require a site plan, a plan up front for the R3 zone district. It's not considered a planned district. However, given the surrounding area, the fact that this was just zoned commercial, given with its proximity and access to Highway 100 and this property's access to the developing commercial district to the east, it is good planning practice to kind of step down from commercial to larger lot residential with some higher density residential. So when you go from commercial to whether it be multifamily or townhomes, then back to this existing single family that's further to the south there, even though it's not in the city limits, and to the north along Old Pottery Road. So we are recommending approval of both of these requests. And that's all I have. If you have any questions of me, I did see the applicant walk in, so if you have questions of him as well. So
Any questions by board members, comments at this point? No. All right, would anyone like to come up and speak?
Were you a handout if you want it, or?
Sure, you can pass it out.
I can get it. All righty. My name's Gary Dussault. I live on 136 South Old Pottery Road. You could say I'm that L up there above the R3 multifamily area. What I've got to say is, previously, we didn't voice any opposition to the development of the area being rezoned as C2 general commercial. Going forward from the last meeting, along with a few recent conversations, it seems irrelevant for any plan to be provided in consideration of rezoning to R3. The thought was to be able to at least have some input as to how this transition from R1A low-density housing to R3 multi-family high-density housing was going to affect the change in the areas being developed. Based on those conversations, once the land is rezoned to R3, the plans can change continuously depending on the contractor or developer as they see fit, as long as they follow the regulations set forth for R3 multi-family high-density housing. With that in mind, it leaves us with only one option. That is to petition any change from the current R1A low-density housing for the remaining land. The neighboring community would also want the land to remain as currently designated R1A low-density housing. This is what everyone bought into in choosing the homes they currently live in for the neighborhood. As you've all heard from the previous meeting, bringing in the R3 multifamily high-density housing is not the best interest of those currently residing in these areas. Please take strong consideration of the established neighborhoods you will be affecting when making your decision to any rezoning of the areas in question. And I do have the petition here. Do I hand that to? This is the 3 families that are, which means we got 100% of the people. Any questions?
Yep, any questions or comments by board?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thanks for the time to allow me to talk here a little bit. I have actually a few questions.
If you could introduce yourself.
Okay, Steve Hoffman. I live at 2045 Spring Valley Lane. I'm at the lower corner of the large rectangle there. Whatever develops is going to go in about 60 feet from my back door, so I'm not real happy about this. First question I had, and I wasn't at the last meeting, so if I could ask a question, can I do that?
Sure.
Okay, so do we have any idea of what the density expectations of an R3 family is? How many units?
Well, as of right now, the maximum is 1 unit for every 3,000 square feet of land.
So 16 acres, 40,000 square feet divided by, I can't do the math that fast. But
Right. I will say, I mean, that's actually a discussion item later tonight as well of amending that, but that is the current code, so.
Okay.
How many units do you think that, can you,
16.8 acres, and I get a calculator out.
So it's just over 100, right?
Well, you'll have buffers, setbacks, things like that, but it could be 200, over 200.
Yeah.
200 units?
It could with the 16.8 acres. I mean, you could get strictly on the amount of acreage, 200 units.
No.
That does not include roads and,
No,
We would have no idea how many would lay
that's
out
strictly
parking
by
spots.
the,
Rule of thumb, understand.
yeah, I mean, because
Right.
then you got to get parking lot, you got to be able to fit the parking for those many units and everything, so ideally, I mean.
So to be fair to say 150 units in there?
Well, and Sal, if the density changes based on tonight's discussion, it would be then one for every 2,000?
Yes.
Okay, so then what would that be? As long as we have the calculator out.
That would be 30% more, so maybe from
Right.
200 to 260.
So the density is going to go up.
Yeah.
That is a
Maybe.
proposal.
That hasn't been decided, but
Yeah.
it's a discussion item on the agenda tonight, so in fairness to answering your question, it's information you should have.
Yes, okay. You mentioned buffers. I wasn't at the last meeting, but I heard that there was no buffer required for residential up against residential.
Setback, so even if it's not buffered per se, there's a certain amount of feet between each property. But what,
oh, well, we got it.
yeah. But saying that the amount of acreage is not sort of a purity for 3,000 square feet to be representative
If you're
of the unit.
referring to buffer as in fence and
Like a
and trees,
landscaping buffer.
Yeah.
that's only between residential and commercial.
Well, I was looking through your, and I'm not a lawyer here, guys, but I was looking through your codes today, and I don't, it says that basically you do have to have a green space, landscaped areas shall be provided. I won't go through the whole thing. There's a lot of nice words in here about enhancing the natural value of the property, all those nice things. And then they do allow for exclusions for R1A, R1B, R1C, but no mention of R3. So I would assume, and as a matter of fact, there's even a little chart that says if you're going to have two properties together, the low density versus high density, they have a little chart, and it basically tells you what kind of buffer it has to be.
Correct.
Okay, so there is a.
Yeah, so with, R3 is considered HDR, high-density residential, and then single family is LDR,
Right.
low-density. That requires buffer yard B, which is 15 feet, and it does specify the amount of landscape.
Vegetation, right.
Vegetation that's in that 15 feet. So
Right.
that would be something where, since this is an unplanned request, staff has to review that whenever that gets submitted. So it would have to be put in regardless, it's just we review that in-house.
So it's not automatic.
No, it is.
It is automatic.
Yeah, so if this were to be rezoned to R3, any property that is single-family adjoining it, they would have to have that 15-foot buffer with the vegetation.
Is that on top of the setback, or?
It is separate, yeah, so the setback, they could not put anything within the setback or the buffer. So,
But it's not both. It's not the setback and buffer.
no, yeah, so it is, it essentially is 15 feet surrounding the property.
Plus 25.
No.
Yeah, if you could wait till later.
no,
We
no.
have to have it on.
No, it is not. So-
Mike.
There's a setback is, say there's no buffer and the setback's 6 feet, they could build 6 feet, but in this case, since there is a buffer, the minimum's 15 feet. So on their side yard setback, they could have a 15-foot buffer, and then they could start building right outside that 15-foot buffer. Most likely it'd be a parking lot, you have to have a fire lane, so most likely it'd be 15-foot buffer, fire lane, parking lot, and then building.
So I just want to be sure, so it could be a part of the setback, depending on other factors.
Yes.
Right.
Correct, because the 15 feet is right in the middle. I mean, if it's a rear yard setback, you got 25 feet, but if it's side yard, you have 6. And so the 15-foot would just be along any property that is adjoining single family.
I'd also like to talk about stormwater drainage and just rainwater runoff. Right now, that property, and
Excuse me, sir, can you speak into the mic more?
sorry.
You can pull it
that-
closer
Yeah,
to
you can pull it down if it's.
that property right there, for the
2
most
acres?
part,
You're talking about the 2 acres or the?
no, I'm talking about the 12 or the 14 acres.
Okay.
A large part of that drains right through my yard. And I would be real concerned if they would scrape all that dirt off there, Because I know the next time it rains, it wouldn't be rainwater, it'd be mud. And so I don't know what kind of protections we have as property owners to that type of construction.
Correct. So we do have stormwater protection, stormwater regulations they have to abide by. If they're just going to be grading the lot, they have to get a grading permit, put up silt fencing and everything to make sure it doesn't run off into the neighboring property. After that, if they're actually going to do construction, they have to get engineered stormwater plans that show they're going to handle any runoff on site, whether that's underground detention or put in a detention basin, but they have to submit those to be approved by the city engineer.
So all the rainwater has to stay on their property?
Correct.
Okay. And during construction, you're saying silt fences?
Correct.
Okay.
So they have to basically have an engineer show the calculation of existing runoff today with it being all vegetation, and then what the proposed runoff is with the new construction based on their site plan, and then any of that increase they have to hold on site. So that's typical for any development. So.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty important because
Right.
there's a lot of water that runs through there right now, and I have to manage it myself. If they would scrape all that vegetation off, it would just get worse, and it would be a problem.
Yeah.
That's really my questions. I guess my comment is this. My office is in St. Louis, and so consequently, I get a lot of comments about, oh, you're from Washington. What a great town. What a great place. I drove down there the other day. I saw the riverfront. I drove through some of the subdivisions. They all look perfect. I would love to move there someday. Well, I don't think that this type of development is what they saw. And I don't think that this type of development is what they had in mind when they looked at this town. And I think that everybody here should keep that in mind when they consider this. I mean, personally, this is going to trash my lot. It's going to trash our subdivision. It's going to reduce our property values. It will clearly change our street. And I think when I look at some of these regulations and I say, well, it's going to be 25 feet, 15 feet, those aren't going to help us. It's still going to be a bad thing if you put 250 different building units on a 12 or 14 acre lot back there. It's going to be not what has been done before. I don't know of any development in this town that's going to be that dense, that large. Am I right?
Well, we don't have a plan for it yet, so we have no clue what the density is.
Okay, but the possibility could be it would.
Right. I mean, I don't know what to compare it to. I don't have an answer to that. So, I mean.
But even High Street has, I drove by there tonight, that has a huge buffer. It has way more than 25 feet. So I'd hope this board would consider that when they're looking at these plans. If you do decide to go ahead through it. Personally, I think it should go in as single-family homes, or at least R2, where you're putting in duplexes. So I'm opposed to this on several levels, as it will certainly cause my property value to drop. It will cause runoff problems, light pollution, traffic noise, right in my backyard. But I've lived here for 30 years, and what really bothers me more than anything, this development's going to just change the whole area. It's just going to be a black mark. I don't think it's going to be a good addition to this community. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Evening. My name's Harry Kessler. I'm at 2015 Spring Valley, the northeast corner of our subdivision. On this proposal, this ground originally was, I inquired about it when I moved in. They said it was going to stay in one, it had to be bought as one large lot. Now we're breaking it down into different sections and doing different things with it. The multifamily is presented as a buffer, but they've already approved commercial to the east of my property. You've approved commercial along Highway 100, which backs up to some of the individual single-family units now. So the idea that that would be a buffer is no longer valid. They had talked about senior housing going in, but at this point, even the baby boomer generation is going to peak out in 10 years. If it takes 3 to 5 years to build this project, within 5 years after that, all you've added in our backyard is low-income housing. I mean, senior housing by definition is something that can't be afforded on fixed income.
I don't think it was necessary. I think seniors 55 and up, but I'm not sure that's, and we can get the applicant up later. I'm not sure that's what it's going to be. I don't think he is either right now.
So we're now increasing the density and it's going in as low-income housing.
No. Nobody said that. Something came up about the housing that's on High Street at the last meeting, and they wanted to know if that was low-income housing. To our knowledge, that is not low-income housing. They did receive tax credits from the states to build, but it's not low-income housing.
The individuals did not receive tax credits. The builder got tax credits to build it.
Correct, but you're talking about putting 200 units on that piece of property.
Possibly.
The value of that can't be anywhere near a quarter of what my property is, just by the density and the size of the lots. You're putting in something that it doesn't exist in Washington now. It's a lower valued piece of property. It's a lower valued house. It has to be, just by the density you're talking about putting in there. And if you increase that density, it's going to get even worse. And another thing, if you look at my property straight above it, you approved for commercial, that little wedge off Highway 100, that's absolutely unviable as a commercial piece of property. Eventually, they're going to come back down and they're going to have to add a portion of the property to the south of that to the commercial, either to connect the commercial property or make that a viable piece of property. It's going to have to be done that way. So at some point, the commercial is going to spread south. Directly behind my house, to the north of it, is the drainage ditch, and it's mainly old growth trees. That's our main buffer from noise from the highway. Once you approve this, you know, there's no replacing that once it's gone. If they're going to run the commercial south, you know, I mean, perfect thing for me would be to buy the property behind me and keep the old growth trees and the density there. But at this point, once you zone this for high density housing, all these options are off the table. There are no more options. Some developer is going to come in and level that property and take it all down. It won't, you know, my neighbors and I, we could build our own buffer. We wouldn't be complaining about 15 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet if there was acreage sold across the bottom of that property. But we can't do that once it's rezoned from the residential designation. You know, we can't fight this development because we don't know what it is. There's nothing to really discuss. We don't mind it annexed into the city of Washington. It's the zoning we're having a problem with because no one in the building can tell us what's going in there or how it's going to work or anything else. If that was sectioned off where they said, okay, we're going to put an acre here, that's going to be commercial, you can buy the acre south of it, something along those lines. But once again, once you rezone that, there are no more options for any of us. So it's going to be a real problem in the future. Just one other thing. I live outside the city of Washington, so I wasn't informed or asked any opinion when they rezoned the east side of my property. We found out about this secondhand, that they were going to rezone north of our property. I don't know if that's standard operation, but if that's how you guys say welcome to Washington, I have a major problem with it.
Yeah, we have to notify people within 180 feet.
185 feet. So whether you live within the city limits or not, you will get a notice from us if you're within 185 feet. Excuse me, but we do not send out letters for annexation. It's for rezonings in the existing city limits. So that's why the only letters that were sent out for this development are for...
Were people that were already within 185 feet of Washington.
Yeah, we did a measurement for this parcel, and this parcel. And that 185 feet just didn't reach this subdivision here. So it was essentially...
I'm still on record as it being a very bad policy. I mean, I'm your neighbor now. You've annexed all the way up to my property, or you're about to. And, that's kind of like I said, hello that I got.
Are you really surprised that Washington is growing, that we're annexing? That if you were that close to the city limits, are you surprised that we're annexing them? And that's really the issue, right? I mean, that's part of the issue. I mean, the rezoning is a big part, but also the fact that anybody that lives anywhere close to the city limits has to assume, hopefully someday, the city will grow, and
I'm not
it's
opposed
gonna
to
come.
growing, I'm not opposed to annexing, I'm not opposed to rezoning, I'm opposed to not notifying your neighbors that you're doing it. That's what I'm opposed to. If you're gonna run up to my property and put commercial in behind it, I'd at least, like,
Well, that's on the applicant. That's
Well,
not,
notice.
the city's not, coming up with the requests here. We're just answering them. So when the letter goes out, it's from the applicant. We're sending on behalf of the city to inform the public.
All right, well, we send the letter out.
But the applicant's sort of the trigger there. So if, it's not like we're,
We're not developing the property.
right.
right, no one is at this point.
Right. Well, the applicant's the one requesting
But
to do
it's
it.
dependent upon whether you rezone it or not.
Right.
So, that's why we're here. We're opposing the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
Because it, as I've stated. So, thank you
Yep.
for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else?
Well, last month I was here and
Just state your name again, please.
Rick Moore, and I live on 138.
And speak in the
South
microphone.
Yeah,
Pottery Road.
if you could pull it over, thanks.
I live on 138 South Old Pottery Road, and last time I was here, I gave you a little history lesson of the area. This time, I'm just going to stick to the issues here and say that as we all sit here, and the home we just left was to the rear of the land which we're talking about tonight is zoned R1. And I would hope that when we leave here tonight, that it's still zoned R1, because that's what we think it should be, single-family R1. The Pandora's box of changing it over to R3 is pretty frightening from everything we've read. Simply don't know what there would be. And we are the people that are going to have people speaking tonight and other people who don't even know this is going on. I talk to people in Meadow Lake who don't even know anything about this. We're the ones that are going to have to live with changes and this tremendous density. And it's going to be a tremendous change from where we have right now. It's not going to be anything like it. The density is just incredible. And so what I wanted to say, well, for one thing, this property changes has Meadow Lake to the south, Pottery Road to the north where we are, and Pottery Road to the east. And I think that the concerns we have, I think I could list 3 or 4. One is property value, which has already been mentioned. Another is proper saleability, which is a whole nother factor. And the third is safety and security. All these things are of concern to us. And if I want to look at the first one, property value, location means everything. And right now, we have location. The houses along Pottery Road, the houses in Meadow Lake have location. And that location is what helps you with your property value and the saleability of your property if you want to sell it. We have that now. Will we have it when we have this tremendous density of buildings, which I don't know, and maybe somebody does know, whether these are going to be rentals, whether they're going to be single family, what's going to be happening. I don't know if they're going to be rentals or not, and that makes a difference. We've not been told. But instead, to the rear of our property, instead of looking out over, there must be 50 to 100, maybe to 150 century-old trees back there, which really add character to the whole area. Question is, how many, if any, of the century trees that are along around the fence line, up by the cemetery, along the creek, how many, if any, of those will remain? Not to mention the rest of the green space. It's feared that the dense construction will make it necessary to eliminate everything, or nearly everything. So instead of looking out over green, we're going to be looking at masonry, brick, parking lots, and all that. Would that affect our property value? I sure think it would. Also, I should say that I suspect that I know that we selected the house we live in, not because of the house per se, but because of the location. And I know our neighbors, Gary just spoke, I know they came from, she's from Michigan, he's from Maine. I know that when they moved to Washington to get a job here, what they did is look for location. They wanted a house with a little bit of land around them, nice quiet area. They picked that house specifically, just as we did, and just as people who lived in Meadow Lake picked their house out. They didn't pick it because it had 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, and they picked it out because of location. And if this changes tonight, location changes dramatically. Now, I don't say there won't be any green space back there, but I suspect there might be a little patch of green grass here and maybe a sapling or a bush, but nothing like what we have. And as I said, it'd be quite a change. The second thing I want to talk about is saleability. Saleability of our property. I believe saleability of the property along Potter Road, all the way down Potter Road, our house is included on Potter Road, and Meadow Lake. I believe the saleability of all those homes is pretty high, and they will definitely take a hit with the dramatic change we're talking about here. And what I did was, I called a friend of mine, Helen Hallam, who was a former realtor here in town. She just retired just recently from that, and I asked her about the property values and what she could tell me about Pottery Road per se, and she said, well, I've retired recently. I can't tell you too much, but I have friends that I'm meeting this week that are all still realtors, and I'll ask them what they say. So she did, and she got back with me, and she said, well, here's what they said. They said single-family homes are in huge demand in Washington right now. They said on Washington in general. Now, she said, I asked them about Pottery Road specifically, and they said that homes on Pottery Road rarely ever come up for sale, so it's kind of hard to say. They said the last one that did come up for sale sold in 4 days. Again, I believe that the saleability of homes on Pottery Road, Meadow Lake, and this area are, at this moment that we sit here, pretty high. With the development we're talking about, I would expect a nosedive. Again, it's density. And now, what I would also say is that residents that are living here and in Meadow Lake would really like is owners of homes behind us, actual home owners, not renters, home owners that have children, bikes running around, people tossing footballs, grilling on their decks, using the schools, which are really close. We got that great elementary school just down the street and a little ways over. I can hear the practicing bands at the Borgia High School. We're close to schools, great family area. So, yeah, we'd love development. We want homeowner development. We want families, kids, bikes, the whole works. That's what we want behind us. And garden, maybe even a garden, something like that. That's what we like, and that's in keeping with what's there now. That's in keeping with the homes on Pottery Road. That's in keeping with the houses at Meadow Lake. That's in keeping with our houses. We think that there should be consistency with what surrounds the area that's being developed, not something that's a drastic or dramatic departure from what's there right now. The third element is something that's interesting, and I think it's probably come to your attention recently, and that is safety and security. I've been hearing various stories throughout Washington about security, home break-ins, car break-ins, different things. I think that's maybe been on the rise, at least from what I'm hearing. I will say this about where we live, is that we've lived there almost 30 years. Gary's almost 20. The Rashes down the road, that family has had the house for more than 30, and Boers, who are here tonight, have had theirs for more than 30. And in all that time that we lived here, I haven't heard of a single break-in, a single theft, anything, nothing. Just recently, they finished a humongous, big rental structure to our west, not in the city limits. In the 6 months, within the past, I believe 6 months, there has been a break-in of Larry, who's here tonight. His truck, I understand, There also was a theft in Boer's property where they stole chainsaws and equipment and various things. That theft was definitely pinpointed to the apartment complex to our west. We know that. The break-in, don't know where that came from. We're also hearing that Meadow Lake is experiencing some break-ins of various kinds. Now, I don't know the details on this, but I've just heard that from a resident that there have been a number of break-ins over there. Now, this is all recent. This is just recent. And the apartments, the rental apartments to our west, are not only took a large change, they're also planning more. They've been filling in the ground over there little by little, and no doubt they're planning on putting something else up. So we're to our west got a big bunch of rental houses, and there are some security concerns there. Now, to the south of us, if you add all this dense housing to our south, we've already talked about adding the commercial to our east, and we've got these apartments to our west. What does that do to the livability of our area? Doesn't sound good to me. So these are concerns: safety, security, and since we really are in the dark about exactly what's going to be built back there, whether these many structures are going to be rentals, are they going to be owned by the owners? And because if they're owned by people, actually owned, the pride of ownership is a factor, and they will take care of it better than if, say, they're all rentals, or part of them, or some of them are rentals. Again, we're kind of in the dark as to what that's going to be. But just to summarize, I would say that, what has already been said, we welcome development. We welcome annexation. We're not against that. In fact, Gary, my neighbor, is retired from the Navy. He's a civil engineer from the Navy. I think when we first started talking about this development, he was kind of excited. He likes building. He has constructed a workshop house behind his house from ground up. Concrete, electrical work, roof, everything. He's a talented builder, and he was kind of excited about this whole project of somebody building back there. What's it going to be like? And he's interested in construction. But the more he looked at the construction of the buildings that were constructed up south of Casey's, and the more he looked at the more he read about zoning and this and that, the less he was enthusiastic, and now he's become very much opposed to it. And again, finally, just to summarize, we hope that this evening you'll not change this from its existing status quo, which is R1, which is to the benefit of everybody who lives in the area. And even though Meadow Lake they are not residents now, they soon will be, and their concerns also should be taken into consideration. And finally, we would really like, as I said earlier, that we really would hopefully like that someday young families with a little bit of space will live behind us, with kids going to school, and the typical thing like they have at Lewis and Clark and other places where they have actual families living there, young, all ages. That's really what would fit in with what's there now, with the single-family dwellings all along Pottery, our house is included, and Meadow Lake. So I hope you take our concerns seriously and give some thought. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I must say, though, I don't see a lot of young people here tonight. I don't see a lot of young people here tonight with housing. Yeah, not a lot. I said a lot. But that's okay. Anybody else?
My name is Kurt Understall. I represent Little Elm LLC. We're the applicant for the property here in question. And as I said last month, we want the zoning to where we can have some flexibility to be able to zone and build something that transitions from commercial to residential. I met with several of these folks after the meeting last week, and I said, look, we can work some R1 in along the lines. And anybody who knows Kurt Understall, my record's impeccable. You can look at any one of my developments. I don't rip and skip the ground like St. Louis developers do. And what you people have to understand is you're better off working with a local guy than a St. Louis developer, because once the St. Louis guys come, they only care about their pocketbook. The 100-year-old trees he's talking about, we left $30,000 worth of walnut standing in Stonecrest. We didn't harvest it because it was too nice of a shade tree, so those trees are still sitting in those people's backyards. We don't rip and skip. We're here to live. I was born and raised here. I understand change is always a concern, but I rabbit hunted and I quail hunted where I live now. When I was a kid, that was all farm ground. And as you pointed out, Carolyn, if you're not growing, you're dying. Washington has to grow. The young folks have to have a place to live. What we're looking to do is transition into some sort of town housing. If you get on the internet, look up Ohms Farm subdivision in St. Peters, that's kind of what we're looking to model this after. Ohms Farm is a residential development, beautiful residential development, St. Peters. It has townhomes blended on the same street. You don't even know they're townhomes. Beautiful job they did over there.
You said Owens Farm?
Ohms Farm subdivision, St. Peters, Missouri. The villas that are on Hanover on 9th Street, we modeled those after those, okay? Every realtor in the city of Washington said, Kurt's one of the finest, nicest, well-built villas anywhere. That's what we're building. That's what we propose here when we talk about senior housing, we're talking villas. So, I know everybody doesn't like change. You know, me personally, yeah, it'd be nice if every farm stayed a farm, but unfortunately, that's just not the way the world works. And I would rather see this developed right. I am a neighbor to this property. I own land to the east, and I own land to the north. So I want this land developed right. It's been for sale since 2008. So I feel I'm doing the right thing. We want to do the right thing. And on an end note, Sal, what we talked about, you know, you got to have transitional zonings to be able to fit in what you got to fit in. So, again, thank you for your time.
Any questions or comments of Kurt?
I have a comment.
Yep.
I think that there is a whole lot of negativity, you know, rallying around this development that I personally don't think should be that big of a worry. I think with the developer in mind and, you know, what comes to this committee, as far as a plan for the whole property, I feel comfortable about it myself. I think that something nicer can be done than, what could be expected down the road right now at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, and one last comment too is that, there's apartment houses on 5th Street, there's apartment houses on Frank Avenue, there's apartment houses down on East 5th Street, and basically, I was talking to someone today, I forget who I was talking to, basically whoever owns them and whoever takes care of them. I mean, and that's really when, we're bringing this into the city because we know the city does a great job of policing things like that. The gentleman that talked about how great Washington is, well, that's a comment of, the police department, the fire department, parks department, everybody doing their job, city staff, city administration. We're the old scrubby Dutchmen in this town, and we take care of stuff we build. Another fine example, that's in South City, down around Afton, Telegraph. We do a lot of sewer work down there, and there's brick apartment buildings built in the 50s, and they're just as good as the day they look. Now they're a little dated. They're not as fancy as the modern ones today, but they're still well maintained, well taken care of. So,
do you plan on putting in apartment buildings?
My plan is to come up with a plan that works with the neighborhood and has the flexibility. Right now, single family, like the guys talked about, single family and townhomes are hot. But when we transition from that into commercial, we may have to put a couple apartment buildings. There's not going to be apartment buildings right up against everybody's house that they're worried about. That would be less dense, and then we'd move more dense going north.
That'd be like Stonecrest transfers.
Correct.
Transists into.
That's correct.
Villas to single family.
Correct.
And Kurt, are you going to personally develop this, or?
I developed the land. I'm working with some builders right now that are looking for lots. So, I don't necessarily do all the building. I do some building, but We like to just do the land development, and as the gentleman mentioned, you know, we want to keep the trees and keep the buffers as much as we can. Some of that is just old growth. You know, that farm's been neglected. The Camp Schrader farm's actually, the house is beyond repair. It's got to come down. Been sitting empty for, I don't know, ever gets NARB moved to Texas, but you know, the big trees that are along the property lines, there's no reason to take them down. There's absolutely no reason to take those big trees down.
But I guess my question, you'll maintain control of how the builders behave
That's
within
correct.
the scope of your development.
That's correct. And every development I've done since 1993, we've always issued restrictions. And we've talked about that with previous administrations, is that Washington doesn't require that, and Mark Mr. Piontek may be able to comment on that, but you know, we do that as a protection not only for the neighboring property owners, but my property values as a developer, because we don't restrict the property and make sure that it's built right, that it's going to have an 8-12 pitch roof, it's going to have brick fronts, 2-car garages. If we don't do that, then all of a sudden I'm sitting there as a large landowner next to something that's not built right. So we impose those restrictions on our developments, not only to protect the neighbors, but to protect ourselves.
Okay, and again,
And you know, I don't want to sit here and pat myself on the back, but you can take a ride through Stonecrest, Fairfield, Hanover, West Ridge Hills. We did that one in 1993. Every home in there's good as the day it was put up. Well maintained, beautiful landscaping.
so just so that we're clear and the people that are here are clear, it is not your intention to request this zoning and then sell this off to some St. Louis developer?
Nope. Nope, we're going to do the development ourselves.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to point out, I think I put it in my staff report, but I didn't say it tonight, and obviously Darren was covering for me last month while I was at a conference, but in our comprehensive plan, which this will be coming up in our code revision discussion later, but under the land use, goal number 1 is to create provisions to encourage entry-level residences within the community, so for that starter home. And under that goal, there's 3 objectives to achieve that. Objective 1 is encourage private development of higher density residential housing near commercial areas. Objective 2 is developing a housing strategy to create opportunities for renters to become homeowners in the community. And objective 3 is to investigate the creation of residential zoning district, which allows smaller lot sizes but with higher quality architectural standards. So that was kind of where our recommendation came from in trying to align with a comprehensive plan. I just kind of wanted to clear that up. So.
Any other comments from anyone in the audience? Yes, yes, yep.
Well, I guess I appreciate what Kurt said. I appreciate you saying that, and I have seen what you've built before. But I guess you have to understand our standpoint as property owners in the area. We're getting sort of a trust me, just trust me. And when you see a whole, the entire acreage being zoned at the lowest possible denominator, it doesn't give us a great deal of comfort to know that Kurt's going to follow through with what he said. I appreciate that's his intent. I appreciate that Mark has said that he thinks it's going to go that way. But all that, there's a lot of trust me in there. So what's the recourse? Do you have to go all the way to R3? Can you go to a less dense subdivision or less dense zoning? And is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, you have 1, 2, and 3.
Right. I mean, why do you have to go all the way to 3 to do that?
You could get higher density if you do a planned development.
Okay.
So, right?
Right. I mean, planned development's per approved plan. So, I mean, you technically do need to request an underlying zone district. So as of right now, that's why we're having the code discussion tonight. As of right now, planned development still has the same density as R3.
Okay.
And then you have to go to the Board of Adjustment to amend that. Again, that's something we're looking at. But there's 3 different iterations of single family as you get more dense.
Right.
And then there's 2-family, 2-family attached, and then multifamily. So I mean it's pretty much as far as our code gets until you get to a planned unit development is where you can mix all those together.
Okay. Well, again, I think everybody who lives on my street assumed that someday this would be developed. We just all assumed to be single family, and I'd appreciate your consideration on that when you vote. Thanks.
Kurt, could I ask you if you could
Yeah.
come back up?
I wonder if you were asking the same thing I was going to ask.
I can't speak for the board, but I was wondering if you would be interested in doing a plan unit development if the board feels like multifamily would be okay as long as we could see what was going to happen.
Yeah, in fact, as Sal mentioned, if we were to come in with a higher density than townhomes or villas, we would come with a planned development. Because basically, that's where, you know, the code allows us to do, say, cluster development, then try to leave green space, you know, maybe put in a swimming pool or tennis court, that kind of thing, some amenities. So again, you know, to echo what Mark said, I think we have a lot of fear in the audience of, you know, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? The problem is, if for me to zone this R1A and then start with a plan and then go backwards, you know, I've got thousands and thousands of dollars invested in plans that you guys get to pick apart. That we've had several meetings. Those of you been here, you could do a great job of picking my plans apart. But
Why
you know what I'm saying? That all costs money. So I just thought, in the interest of time, let's get it zoned. That lets us have the flexibility. And then again, I think Sal's on board with coming in with a planned development. But for me to spend the money on a planned development, not have the zoning, is kind of Mox Nix. So.
Yep. So,
Right, well, and that's essentially correct. So with that, with the R3, the flexibility that Kurt's mentioning is that the applicant doesn't have to take the risk and pay for the plans up front. Like he said, if you go planned residential, you have to have, there's 18 items that we have a checklist that you have to put onto that site plan to submit with your application. That can run thousands of dollars for, like you said, for engineering costs, and then there's the chance that that doesn't get approved. So the R3, essentially everything that he's mentioned, the townhomes, the apartment buildings, all that is permissible in the R3 district. It's just then staff can then review it after the fact and approve that all in-house. It still has to meet the buffer, still has to meet setbacks, and all the subdivision codes. It's just specifics in the layout and access isn't reviewed publicly. It's just reviewed in-house.
Yeah, and last month I met with city staff on the public works side, and they believe there's a sleeve under Highway 100 that when this highway was built, there was a sleeve put under the highway. Right now, that's in Crocker Water District. I will actually be improving these people's values because we're going to boost up pressure and fire flow in this area once that becomes city. Right now, they're serviced by Crocker Water District, which they're at the end of the water district. Washington's got that nice water tower there at Pottery Road. The idea is to get water on that side of the highway, so then they've got good water flow right there, and then we're going to bring water in off of High Street up through the Jasper Farm and tie all that in. So John and I are trying to come up with a master water plan for this area, and city sewer right now comes in from down below, and we're real close to Meadow Lake Farm with the sewer right now coming off of the valley there by Modern Auto. So again, sewer system, I think Meadow Lake Farm sewer system is kind of outdated or been, has issues where this is all going to be modern city sewer system up and through there. So those are improvements that are for the good of the environment. The only question we had, Sal, was on road access. Again, we look at coming off of South Point or Highway 100 through the commercial tract to that as a secondary access point. South Pottery Road is, I guess, currently in the city now, so,
It is. So, well, it's in the city limits right here, and we talked about that where, obviously, this is what you rezoned. There's access, potential access here. There may be some improvements required. That would be on the public work, on the city engineering side, depending on what is developed here. I can't answer that right now.
Right.
But the interesting thing is, and I actually have requested a MoDOT, I haven't gotten an answer yet. It looks like when the highway was expanded and Pottery Road was separated here, I believe MoDOT actually took over right-of-way all the way out to this portion. And this portion of South Pottery Road is actually an outer road. And so I haven't requested them to MoDOT to figure out if they would be responsible for that approval, but again, until we get a plan, there's no,
Right.
we don't know what access is required.
And we're looking at South Pottery Road kind of like South Point Road. It was there, we're just coming off of it. It's an existing road, so. But we have no problem connecting the dots with a road network so that you got 2 access points. We understand that, so.
Yeah, I think right now, and I don't have it pulled, our master plan does show a connection in between. It follows I think it's on the north side of the cemetery, actually. So we do have a connection that will go east-west to here. So if Don Avenue would connect to the highway here, then we'd have an east-west connection to Pottery Road, kind of having Don Avenue go like that. Again, our master plan just shows those in the general area. So if it were to curve up through here, it would still meet the intent of the master plan. It just, has to meet the subdivision code, so.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, is that what you were?
Yes, that was what I
Sorry.
was asking, because it sounded like that's really what he intends to do. But is there any impact of the petition that they presented?
Just on our vote, I believe, at council.
On the council's vote.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not,
council, okay.
depends how it goes here. The council's vote will be impacted by that letter.
Okay.
Yes. Make it short.
Just, yeah, nothing like before, no notes. Just a quick comment on the, it seems like there's a little bit of comparison between apples and oranges here, because we're being told to look at Stonecrest and various other places, but what's not being pointed out, unless I'm misunderstanding, is that the area we're talking about directly behind us, the density is much greater than many of those other places you're talking about. Yes, I have no doubt that construction is going to be well done, and it's been well done in the past. I don't doubt that. But I think what many of us are concerned about is not just that, but the complete density, the absolute density of the construction back there. That's my concern. And I don't think, and I may be wrong, but I don't think that the other places that we've been talking about are as dense or will be as dense as what this would be.
Oh, we don't know. And well, I think what they were looking at is Stonecrest went from single family to villas.
Yeah.
Right next to it.
Have you seen that area?
Yeah, that's been pointed out to me. I haven't gone over and looked at it. I've heard of it.
And I think the point that the developer was trying to make is the manner in which they develop as compared to if we had an unknown developer coming in who might just want to get rid of all those beautiful trees and might not want to be caring about the impact on neighbors. From what I'm hearing, the developer plans to do essentially a staggered development and try to maintain as much of the natural beauty of that property as reasonably possible.
It still seems like it'd be a real challenge, considering the density that we're talking about. But
But we don't know. We were throwing numbers out the max
yeah,
possible.
what you were talking about, yeah.
But I don't think Mr. Arnstall said that would ever
Yeah.
be.
Right. That number was based on both of these put together, but you got to keep in mind they're not contiguous. I mean, you'd have to have parking on each of those. It's just, and I can't give you a good number, but that was, I think it was, if you actually take the full square footage, it's like 240 units. But, you'd have to take out, you need two spaces per unit. So that's a substantial amount. You're going to need a place for the stormwater. With that big of a spot, that's a substantial amount. So
I mean, you look at streets and
fire lanes.
easements.
And that's where they have to get, there's a lot that goes into that. They have to hire an engineer to figure that all out and figure out the space. It's just, the R3 allows them to do that after the fact.
Yeah.
And-
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that if I were a developer, I'd want to have R3 because it's to their advantage. But as owners, I think that we would prefer the single-family R1.
Well, and what I heard Mr. Unnerstall say, I don't want to put words in his mouth that weren't correct, but what I heard him say was that there would be some single family, some townhomes, perhaps some villas, and perhaps some multifamily closer to the commercial development, which is not necessarily what would be possible with a different developer.
Yeah, I did hear that, but also I heard some other time someone was talking about that, and it sounded as though the single-family development that he was talking about was not going to be near us, but was going to be more toward Meadow Lake in that area, not in our backyard where they could build a house all the way up to, 10 to 25 feet by zoning requirements. But the ones you're talking about would be nice if they were by us, but I suspect, from what I heard, they were going to be over toward Meadow Lake, which would not be by us.
Okay, and I
mean, that's
can't say that I
true.
heard
That may not
specifics
be
from
true, but
him
that's-
as to
That's kind of
that.
what I heard.
Yep.
And it may be somebody from Meadow Lake told me that, I'm not really sure. But, well, thank you.
Thanks.
Barry Kessler again. Something you mentioned, you said once it's zoned R3, it's an in-house discussion on the plan,
Correct.
so there's no more public hearings.
Not unless they come back for a specific plan development request, but if it's R3 and they just want to do the multifamily, then that is, then those plans, the site plans are approved in-house.
So once this is R3, there's no input, there's no meetings like this, there's nothing.
Correct.
We have,
It just like, it'll go to the council if it's approved or or voted
At
down.
that point, I would be a neighbor and I would still receive no notice.
Unless they need a variance or they do a plan, yep.
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 Based on what he was asking, and he's correct. I hear a lot of good things about what he's trying to do, what he wants to bring in. But again, we're blind to it after it gets rezoned. And that's what you're saying over here, is once, this is the only time we get to speak. And that's why we're saying where we are and how we feel about what's going in there. We don't know. We're hearing more and more as you keep having these meetings and we keep discussing it. And it's getting clearer, but it's still anybody's game once it gets changed. And that's what our concerns are. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? By anyone or board members? If not, I'll entertain a motion. First, we'll do case number 180602 on the annexation.
A motion to approve the annexation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to case number 180607, Little Elm LLC on the zoning. Is there a motion?
Considering the comprehensive plan and the need for the type of zoning that this is coming before, I make a motion to approve.
Second that.
First and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. So that'll go to city council.
On the 16th, so a week from today.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on, case number 5, item number 5, case number 180608, preliminary plat Highland Meadows. Sal.
So this is the development directly to the west, the commercial development, Highland Meadows. Located at the intersection of Don Avenue and High Street, the High Street extension. This portion that's not highlighted in the northeastern portion is the existing Casey's that just opened a couple months back. And they're asking, this is Plat 4 of Highland Meadows. It is a creation of Lot 7 and Lot 8. So you can see Lot 7 is 0.5 acres, Lot 8 is 0.98 acres, and this is just a preliminary plat. So the final plat will go to council once, this extension of Don Avenue is in place, or they can go the more common route where they put a performance agreement up and either get a letter of credit or some type of escrow in place for those improvements. Would include the extension of Don Avenue, and I believe the extension of sewer and water just to service Lot 7. The sewer and water doesn't have to necessarily go to the end of the property line, but I think as of right now, it stops on the southern portion of Don Avenue and ties into Casey's. So the easements are there as required, the setbacks are shown, and staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat. So.
Comments by board members? Anyone in the audience like to speak on this? Except for Kurt?
Kurt Understahl, I represent Highland Meadows. We are platting Lot 7. We have an interested buyer to put in a fitness gym there on that property. So trying to make the ground work and the grading work. We still have hope that someday we can land a large anchor tenant on Lot 5A. So we're counting these as like a second-tier sublot. The gentleman wishes to build a gymnasium there, and we're just platting a Lot 8 as an acre lot on the corner. So the water and sewer, as Sal mentioned, does go right in front of the property. Don Avenue's been extended to the end of the back of Casey's. So basically, we do need to extend the street 128 feet. And that's about it. So we'll probably come with the city council with a request of final plat and bring the escrow money in for the street. We're busy right now doing city projects, but we'll try to get it done. So.
And I will just mention that the fact that it keeps the Don Avenue moving east-west, it follows the master plan, because like I said, we do, want an east-west connection somewhere, whether it goes to Highway 100 and then there's a connection with this new development, but, because if, say, Kurt would come in and want to put Lot 7 right here and then Don Avenue,
Yeah,
we would have an issue with that, but I just.
And again, just so you understand, it's hard for us to plat size of lots because there's so many different buyers out there. So we got a half-acre buyer, and we know we want to keep at least an acre on the corner. So we say, okay, let's plat that like that. All along the road, we have those as 1 acre outlots. We'd love to see, Olive Garden, Red Lobster, all the restaurants that aren't here buy those lots along the highway there. Excellent hotel site right there on the corner also. But there's no sense in plotting all that. And the minute one guy comes in, I think the developer to the east there that he's been in here rezoning lots and chopping lots and moving lots. I don't want to waste all your guys' time. I just thought, well, let's just try to find the buyer and then what he wants, and we'll just carve him off a piece. And so, not trying to be elusive or anything there. It's all going to go commercial, but don't know who and when and where they're going to show up. But we're trying like heck to bring in good commercial development. So,
Any questions, Kurt? Anyone else would like to comment? Any other comments by board members? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
First and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to item number 6, case number 180701, Kleesner Properties LLC. Applicant is requesting a special use permit for a short-term rental at 312 Cedar Street. Sal?
Yep, this is another short-term lodging, like I said, 312 Cedar Street. This is directly behind the Calvin. A recently revised, renovated home along Cedar Street. It is zoned R1B, as of all the homes along Cedar Street are there. So in that zone district, even though it's close to the downtown district, they still have to get a special use permit to have the short-term lodging. They do have their own access there. And then also, like we've said in the past, the short-term lodging is pretty infrequent and insignificant in nature, and so we do recommend approval of this, even more so given the nature of its location in the downtown district. So,
Any comments or questions of Sal by board?
I'll make a comment.
Okay.
That is quite the improvement on that building.
Yes,
Very
it looks
nice.
beautiful.
Very nice.
It's so nice to see, beautiful old homes preserved so nicely like that. So thank you for what you're doing.
Historic preservation, we salute you.
There's a building right over here. I heard it coming. Any other comments by anybody in the audience? Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I would move we approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So move. Item number 7, thanks. Case number 180702, applicant Farmax is requesting a fence in lieu of a buffer yard.
and I'm going to do 0703 in the same presentation.
180703, applicant is requesting preliminary plat approval of Farmex Plat 1.
All right, so this is the property right across from Sonic and the Dollar General on Fish Street, commonly known as the Stumpy property. It's currently 2 parcels, and they're wanting to do a boundary adjustment to turn it into one. Typically, that would just go to City Council for approval and wouldn't need to go to before you all. However, this property has sat like this for so long, it's still considered an original tract, and it never went through a subdivision. So technically, they're subdividing it as, I have it pulled up here, well, I don't have the name, FarmX Plat 1. And they are removing this property line and platting this lot as Lot 1 of the subdivision. And so that's the request. That's the 0703. We have no problem with that. They show the setbacks as necessary. They have all the appropriate easements. They have, since technically they're not subdividing, they don't have to do any subdivision improvements. But even with the location on Fifth Street and their access, they have the right-of-way frontage, they have water, they have sewer. There's no public improvements that are required. Their other request is that they are looking to do a fence in lieu of buffer yard. Now, we've approved these in the past where, we allow fencing in lieu of buffering, especially on planned developments. This one is a little bit more specific, that it said it needs council approval, is because it's not only, I should have rephrased that. We've approved fencing in lieu of landscaping. You still have buffer, but you have to put fencing instead of landscaping. This is a true fencing in lieu of buffer. And they see this line here that they added. This is where the buffer yard requires by code. And you see they're proposing a drive-through. They need additional, they have a dumpster here. They need additional pavement here for access around the drive-through. And so they are proposing to put the pavement up into the buffer and then have a 6-foot vinyl fence be placed along the southern portion of the property along those.
Well, maybe it is.
So what is this business, Sal?
Yeah, that's just what we were going to ask.
Well,
Yeah.
they have not told us, so that's something that we don't require that information up front, but the fact that it's called FarmX, I would suppose that it's some
a
type
farm?
of pharmacy.
I would assume so, but I'm thinking, okay,
With a drive.
where is the?
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
I'm kind of disappointed that no one's here from the applicant unless they are, and I just am missing them.
Yeah, no, this actually came in from the architecture firm. The letter is in there from Steve Struberg,
Okay.
submitted on behalf of the applicant. The engineer said they had they signed a non-disclosure. They couldn't tell us who it is. They went through the code and said, yes, they as they interpret it, the code, the use that's going to be is permitted on the C2 overlay. So there really was, from no point in this request for us to require the use, because the zoning's already there, and so the fencing, the request to have a buffer in lieu of,
You mean a
or
fence
fencing
in
in lieu
lieu
of
of-
buffer has nothing to do with the use, because no matter what, it would have to be put in.
So that didn't trigger a letter to any neighbors?
No, it did not.
Okay.
Because this is actually a very specific section of the code. Let me pull it up.
So, yeah, because I'm just confused. Okay, if the use is irrelevant and nothing that we seem to be concerned about is relevant, why are we talking about a fence in lieu of a buffer yard?
Let me pull up that section of the code real quick.
You got to approve that.
The one that's right next to what I just had, the buffering.
It's a lot of parking.
And what was your comment you said, Tony? I didn't hear that.
Oh, it did not trigger a letter to the nearby residents for this, even though they will be, we would get rid of the requirement for them to have that 15 feet separating between them and residences behind them.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's not a rezone or a
Right, there's no letters. So
special use permit, so there's no letter that needs to go
I
out.
used to have this tabbed, it was a lot easier.
So the business has to fit into that present zoning.
Right.
And if it does, there's nothing we can do. They're just wanting to remove a lot line and the fencing.
Okay.
It would be interesting to hear the neighbors in the back.
Be nice to see that property develop.
Oh, you know what? We just got it updated online. It's finally done. Let me search it.
400.190 is the buffer yard, landscaping buffering.
Do you agree with that, Mark, that we can do the fence in lieu of?
Yeah, if you determine that that's adequate, yes.
Right, and that's what I guess it's hard to, to me, if not knowing what the use is, because I mean, I can guess based on the drawing, but I mean, this could be, you know, a fast food drive-through also, and, you know, maybe the neighbors would, I mean, that might be viewed a little bit differently. I don't know.
Like Hardee's,
Well,
right down the street.
yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, I'm all for developing this property. I just feel like I want more information.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. In lieu of a landscape buffer, the city council may require fencing, which meets the requirements set forth in section 400.185. Those are the fencing requirements for all fences, and so long as it is opaque in nature only.
But-
So it's very specific to this landscape buffer section where it's not a variance that we send out letters for. It's just for the specific development they are asking for. Instead of having a buffer, they're putting a landscape. I will say that they're placing it on top of a retaining wall, as you can, in the plan. So
Okay.
it will be taller than 6 feet. It will buffer a little bit more. Our recommendation is that although it may not be as aesthetically pleasing as as landscaping, I do believe it meets the intent of what the code, the intent of the code for screening. So I think the fence on top of a retaining wall will adequately screen the development. Any light, if it's zone commercial, so any lighting that wouldn't have been approved anyway has to be directed towards the towards the development. That's not what the landscaping is for, but.
How about the drive-through?
Well, right, that's what I'm,
Is
because
there
it seems.
a volume
Yeah.
control on?
As long as you can show you meet five vehicles stacking, you do not need a special use permit.
Because
But
what,
I mean the sound, we don't have any kind of ordinance on, it can only be so loud back there.
No.
right, because what,
24-hour.
right, because what I'm interested in, I mean, what I'm looking at, the purpose that they're requesting this for is so they can move their drive-through lane closer to the homes behind them. And so that's what's got me worried is what kind of a drive-through lane are we putting next to those neighbors with just a little fence between them? I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to understand what we're doing. I mean, just the picture could be very innocuous or it could be a little scary.
Well, basically doing a search for the address that they have on their permit from whatever 21. I mean, it is Farmax is a privately held company in St. Louis and the headquarters for the business, and it's basically is categorized under pharmacies and stuff. But that's taken from his 21 design group, that
Is this,
Farmax
so it looked like they're
Properties.
not 24 hours open, just based on what I just saw there. The Farmax
Yep.
pharmacies say that they are closed, maybe at this
6
time.
PM seems to be, I mean, we
9
can't
a.m.
make
6 p.m.
inferences, you know, because
Well,
we don't
right,
have
we
the
can't, I mean, we
applicant,
don't
but-
know,
Right.
but
Right.
it just,
But
it
again-
doesn't sound like it's Walgreens.
But I will just mention that even if it was a McDonald's, and they came in requesting the buffer, I just, we cannot, I mean, as far as I know, put hours of operation stipulations on.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that, Sal, I'm just concerned, you know, if this is gonna be, you know, vehicles driving around this building, I mean, like McDonald's all the time, if I live behind it, I might want 15 feet instead of, you know,
Just
a couple
landscaping,
inches of
I-
vinyl.
Right.
I mean, that's all I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Sal, did they have to apply for any kind of a variance for this?
No, so,
Well, that's what this is.
yeah, well, it
right?
is, so this, but there's no
And
application.
then the residents nearby then all will be notified, right?
No, not for, that's why this is a little bit more unique situation where under the landscape section, it requires that council can approve this. And so there's no application, there's no letter that goes out. They just submit a letter, something in writing that they are requesting fence in lieu of a buffer. And it goes to P and Z and council.
So there was no requirement to tell neighbors?
Nope.
Okay.
How close, do you have any idea how close their fence actually is to their property line or anything like that?
It is pretty much on it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's what it appears to be.
there's if you go by, I mean, if you went by there,
Well,
there's
it's
an
like just
existing
looking at
fence
that,
now.
It looks like it's off it slightly like most of them and stuff, but
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a foot off.
yeah, something like that. Whatever.
And then this
Now,
is
is that just gonna go across the back, wrap
Yeah.
around or
Nope,
something?
it's only required across the back because on each side of it is commercial zoning.
Right.
And then there is, a retaining wall here.
How, do we know how high the retaining wall is?
See, it's not on here.
Because I know that property is.
I know,
kind
and
of
because John Nilgis had actually was speaking, our city engineer was speaking to the applicant, the engineer about it first, and he said they're actually, the difference between the parking lot and the house in the back will be 11 feet, so that would mean it's the retaining wall is 4 to 5 feet with the 6-foot fence on top. He must have had a topo plan sent to him separately because there's no topo on here, so take that.
Okay.
They won't be able to see the building, but from the drive-through in the car, they won't be able to see that car because that ground, if you look, go home at night, that yard is up.
Yeah,
In
if you could
other
come
words, the
up.
lights-
Can't help
No,
yourself.
You're here as a citizen.
As a citizen, we did the demolition on the Stumpy property, and when that gets graded, what that engineer designed is actually a good thing. So really, that fence would be a screen of sound and light, because it's gonna be in the air.
So if
So-
a car,
You're
so
saying
if a
11
car is
feet, 11.
driving through.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up.
The drive-through's
So-
gonna hit a retaining wall.
It wouldn't even
Okay.
hit the houses.
Yeah,
That's good.
because their yard
Okay.
is way higher.
So-
Pull it up on, you know what you ought to do, pull up Google.
That's what I'm trying to street
and
view.
then do a pan
Because,
view.
right, because that's what, I mean, as I recall the property, I mean, that's what I'm trying to conceptualize in my mind, Kurt, because, I mean, I deal in crazy people. I mean,
Right.
and so I'm envisioning
we all?
somebody driving through.
Well, what-
I'm
you're in
envisioning someone
sales.
driving through the fence, you know, and
thing
so it doesn't sound like that's physically possible.
One thing I think that, I don't know if it's in the city code, it should be in the city code, is, you know how you, in Walgreens, when you talk on that little canister thing and that sound kind of
Oh,
goes?
yeah.
That would be the only thing, but there, right there, see that dirt berm in the back
Yeah.
there?
It's hard to tell,
Yeah.
but that fence is on top of a berm there, right there.
Okay, so that's what
You know,
we're,
you already kind of got a differential grade there.
Yeah.
Those neighbors.
So that's an existing fence on top of a berm, so they would.
so they're
Kurt,
gonna
would you like to come back, say something on Kleesner's project he did? Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
that would help him because right now he's looking at Sonic. Yeah. Right, there's no buffer.
Is there a mechanism that, you know, when we run into something like this, to trigger a review of this part of the code to say if there should be a request like this that comes through, that it should alert the residents, or we should send something, or is that just going to come back to
That's my
haunt? I
only
mean,
concern.
Where do you stop? Absolutely everything that somebody does to their property is going to affect the neighbor in one way or the other. So where do you stop with First of all, there is no requirement under the law anywhere that you send out notification to anybody. You're required to do public hearing notices on special use permits and
Zoning.
publish a notice of public hearing in the newspaper on rezonings and special use permits, but you're not required anywhere to send out letters to anybody within 185 feet or 1,000 feet. You're not required to. It's not a requirement in the law. It's a courtesy that the city does, but it's not required.
I see.
So,
So this would even go beyond best practice. This would go invasive.
Big time.
Any other comments?
Other than it sounds like an improvement to me.
Yeah. I'm glad somebody.
Sure, we're not going to let Kurt say anything, so.
Quick, he's busy.
No other questions, comments? I'll entertain a motion on the first, number 7, case number 180702, just the fence for the buffer
I
yard.
would move that we approve.
Second.
First and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item number 8, case number 180703, just the removal of the lot line. The plat.
I would move that we approve that as well.
First and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item number 9, discussion of code amendment.
Right, so I just kind of wanted to throw a discussion in there. We're not gonna do our public hearing or anything tonight, obviously, we didn't notice that. I just kind of wanted to get a feel for this board, and I know it's kind of ironic now that the one we just looked at was much larger. Let me pull up the email I sent you guys real quick. There we go. So we've actually had this discussion internally the past few weeks since we've started having just more inquiries about multifamily. The first one started about a year ago. There was a request it was already R3 zoned at the corner of 5th and Pence. And there's two existing apartment buildings there and then an empty lot. They were going to put in a third building, I think that had similar to what the existing older buildings had. They wanted, I think, 12 units. But our code had been amended since those were built, and it's a 24,000 square foot lot. That would only allow them 8 units. So with...
Excuse me, when you say they, is it the other two owners? I mean, the other owners of those two buildings, or is it?
No, it was a completely new developer. Yeah, just was looking at buying that lot. But it came to our attention that from having not just that conversation, but with some other people who were looking at the possibility of doing multifamily development, some more starter home development, that our code was more restrictive than anyone really in the area. And I'm painting with a broad brush here, but I think it may have been designed that way to maybe keep that multifamily residential development at ease. That was written at that 3,000 square feet per unit was written before we did our 2013 zoning code that has those objectives that I just read earlier about encouraging this type of development. And I don't think that 3,000 square feet per unit really facilitates that development. I think that developers won't really get a realistic return on investment on 3,000 square feet. The one we looked at with the 16.8 acres, yeah, that's a lot of development, but you got to think inside the city limits, you're not going to find property that big. And I know we're going to be annexing, but I think it's my recommendation to lower this to a little bit higher density in order to meet these objectives of the master plan. I sent a table to you guys, and actually, while I was looking these up, Andrea Stratman with KJU put this table together with those links, so that was helpful, and I just forwarded that to you guys because that gave really the best in the area. I didn't want to put in St. Louis City or St. Louis County because those are well above what anything we would want really to have any comparison to, but you can see with 3,000 square feet, we are the highest between Warrenton, Eureka, Fenton, O'Fallon, St. Charles, Baldwin, and Union. By looking at this, my recommendation was, I put in here, I threw at 2,000 square feet. That does make it substantially more, a third higher increase in density. But I thought that was realistic for maybe some of the developments we'll be seeing on these. And then we're going to see more residential. I think if we see more multifamily come in, it will be planned unit development. But as our code sits, you have to choose an underlying zone district for that planned unit development. And with the current R3, if you choose an underlying at 3,000, there's no point in spending the money on a PDR up front. And so that was kind of how this all got started. Well, maybe we should go back and look at this and decrease that density and set that at about 2,000. That would match Baldwin's. On there, it would be less than what Fenton and Eureka have. They have about 2,500. Some of them do it per acre, like O'Fallon does, 15 units an acre. St. Charles is 18 units an acre. 2,000. I mean, that is 43. 21 units an acre.
And would you say the other one was 18?
St. Charles does 18.
So what's the range on what you're looking at? Like, what's the highest, what's the lowest?
The highest is Union. It has 1,500 and 1,500 square feet per unit, and the highest is us at 3,000 in the general area.
What are the other ones? What's the next lowest?
The next lowest.
You're looking at around 25 27, 22, I think.
Yeah,
but-
so Warrenton was
St.
below
Charles.
us at, so they're about 2,500. So they need 2,700 for their first three, and then 2,500 additional, which is kind of how ours works now. It's larger for the first
What's
three.
the
and then
next highest above Union?
Baldwin, 2,000. So that would be what I was recommending we match. And my second recommendation, which I hadn't got a chance to speak to Mark about this yet, but would be that if we go with a planned unit development and they say they want to, say we move this to 2,000, 2,500, either one, and a planned unit development comes in, a request, and they want to go above and beyond that. My recommendation is that we amend the code where that density can be approved per approved plan, where P&Z and council approve that density variance essentially, rather than sending that back to the Board of Adjustment. Right now, it has to go to two different boards. And I think it's going to be kind of chicken or the egg. The Board of Adjustment's going to be saying, will the council approve this layout? And P&Z and council's going to be saying, will the Board of Adjustment approve this density? So I would hope that we could kind of wrap that into one request, but I didn't know how our zoning code works. If you go above that, you automatically have to go to Board of Adjustment.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I am.
It's like I was waiting for the question mark.
The answer is I don't know.
Okay.
Because the way there, and we talked about this some time ago, the way the language is written in that PD district, it's fairly complicated to figure out the density bonus. So I'd have to think about that a little bit about
Yeah.
what we'd have to change.
But if nothing else, I would like to set the new minimum for R3 to a little bit more realistic to actually facilitate this type of development, which I mean, it's objective number one under land use. Encourage this entry-level residences, which I think is probably the cleanest way to put it without stirring up too much controversy, but
You mean HUD?
yeah.
It always goes there.
You got to quit cursing in meetings.
What's your flavor?
I want to hear from Kurt Understall.
While you're here.
Isn't this a representative for Farmax?
No, I'm not representing Farmax.
So as a citizen.
As a citizen and as a developer, I appreciate Sal taking the lead on this. We are looking at, you know, some tracks that are adjacent to heavy apartment dense areas already, and we're looking at tracks that are by commercial, and we're saying, gosh dang, you know, the numbers don't work because the people that own these tracts of land, they're saying, well, heck, you know, this should be worth this much money. These are things you can do. You can put apartments on them. Well, when you go and look at those codes and you look at what you can do, you know, the numbers don't match. So, and again, it's ironic that we're talking about this, and we had a group that was so fearful that that's what my intent is on that, and that's not my intent. But I would love to work with this board and the city as input and bring other builders and developers in. If you drive all the communities in the area that he mentioned, Baldwin, Manchester, Ellisville, hell, my children used to play ball down there on Ellisville, and right when you come in Ellisville there, off 109, there's just a ton of nice, well-built apartments right on 109. Nobody, if you took a poll of city residents, everybody said, I don't want an apartment building, I don't want an apartment building. Wait, they got to go somewhere. And my thought would be, if you let flexibility in your planning, that if a developer seeks out the commercial buffered land and seeks out, versus, you know, we've had situations where they popped apartment buildings in Old Town residential. They just plopped them right in the middle of town, and I think that's where some of the fear comes from, that they don't, you know, if you have a single family residential neighborhood, that's kind of what they would like to see stay that. So, you know, if you could, and again, I'm putting a burden on him, he's the young planner guy that knows everything, figure out a chart that says if you try to develop more dense in a residential existing area, maybe you don't get to put as much. But if you do it over here in a commercial buffered, does that make sense? You know, to where it's transitions in.
area.
So are you suggesting that the density would be different depending on what you're located next to?
Well, what I think Sal's alluding to with Mr. Piontek is that if a developer, obviously the numbers that are there now, you're not going to see a lot of that type of development. But if you allow the flexibility that on a case-by-case basis, if you have existing apartments or you have existing, commercial buildings, and there's a tract of land that kind of just got passed by because nobody's going to build single family on it. What didn't get brought up tonight is if you try to put single family homes right up against the highway, good luck with trying to sell those homes.
Right,
Good luck with that.
right.
So, it's not fair to the landowner, and take me out of it. Mr. Campschrader, they own the land, but it's not fair to that gentleman or heck, there's 4 or 5 tracts for sale right now along the highway. So you have to be able to transition. And Sal, what's the term? You went to school for that? Transition planning. Anyway, that's what you want is to be able to transition cross from high dense commercial to single family and in between. And again, so we feel that you have to take a look at, and again, I'm not asking you to make a decision here tonight, but if you would take a look at an aerial photo of Washington, it's like a quilt patch. You've got vacant land sitting here and there and everywhere. Another piece of land that comes from mine right across from Schulte's Bakery. That guy wanted, New York City downtown high-rise price for that land. That land sat and sat and sat and sat because the numbers did not work with density, with what you could do with it, with what they wanted in land value. So,
one of these years, he's going to be right.
well, it's right. Yeah. But so, and again, I think that might be a spot that you could put a nice apartment building. You could walk city parks, those kind of things. What I'm saying is there are tracts of land there that make sense, and there's some that don't make sense.
Well, I think in a way, that's why I wanted to allow the planned development density be approved all in one swoop of things, because then you could set that maybe lower, or that density at maybe 2,500, say if we wanted to go a little more conservative, because it's next to residential. And then they can just go R3, do 2,500 square feet per unit. And then if it is closer to a commercial area, that's when you go PUD because you're trying to go a little bit higher density. And the problem with that is I think no matter, people have this fear of multifamily development. You're going to have that request that we had tonight no matter what's next to commercial, whether it's next to residential, they're going to want to see the plan up front regardless. So I think that's kind of where we need to choose that number where we feel comfortable with, whether it's residential or commercial, and then let the higher density go to those planned districts would be my recommendation. So if we think 2,000's too high next to commercial, and like I said, we can come up with a chart where, yeah, your R3 adjacent to commercial, you can get a higher density. Your R3 adjacent to commercial, lower density. That wouldn't be difficult to do. Or you could
Well, like right now, your code allows for a 10% bonus or 20% bonus?
up to 20. We have a density bonus for different amenities that you add. You can get up to 20 if you piggyback different. So a swimming pool, a walking trail that's on your planned development, you can get up to 20% increased. And that's kind of that clustering Kurt was saying, where you can, say you have a large, your parcel itself is large enough, but you want to cluster all the development in one area of it, then you could, Willows technically did that. They put that lake in. So if you look at where Willows actually built, that density is fairly high where it's at, but they put in that lake and they got that density bonus because we were able to, and it was built, count that lake as part of their square footage.
Right. And to your point, Carol, I think you said earlier about, working with the trees and landscape, that's where we can leave that old growth forest if we can densify here and leave the buffered trees next to their, the single family and stuff like that. So that's what we're proposing, is that they take a look at that.
Well, and that, I think it's what, when Mark said, it gets complicated with that planned development in density, because without using that density bonus, you are supposed to spread that out throughout the full parcel, you know, and make sure you don't cluster it. But then you can start getting into those density bonuses or cluster development in order to develop how you want. So.
Yeah, and you know, if you look at the wards of Washington are divided into 4 wards, and you look at, okay, if we've got so much open space in this ward, do you allow a little more density to balance that out? That's something you could look at too. That's just an idea that gives, because if you say, well, oh, we have a 3-acre tract, and we got to fit it on that 3-acre tract, but if that 3-acre tract is surrounded by, you know, 500 acres of park ground that's never going to be built on, well, you really aren't densifying that area. So, you know, it's where you draw that circle and where you say, okay, you're meeting that square footage density. So, those are things to consider too.
Thanks.
See you next Monday or next month.
We can only hope, Kurt. We can only hope. What's your thoughts on the amounts or?
Do you want us to do something?
Well, I would like, I would like to.
I don't mean to, you know, but.
Well, in the August meeting, I would like to actually schedule a public hearing because since this would be an adjustment to the zoning code, we have to have a public hearing here and at City Council.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to schedule that public hearing in August, and I need a number to put in. We have to put the code revision in the paper. So whether, I mean, my recommendation was 2,000. I understand what we're saying is next to, depending on what you're next to, that can have different implications. I think 2,500 is also reasonable. I mean, the 1,800, are the 18 per unit's 24?
47.
Yeah. 2420 is 18 units an acre. I mean, just kind of need a number. It'd be real simple change. I just need to change these 2 lines here.
I've seen 1,500. I don't like the way it looks.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, if you put like 2,400 or whatever and stuff, and then again, have your bonus next to a commercial or something like that, you know, kind of written the same way that.
Or go to, yeah.
Well, and that's why, yeah, I would hope that we can do a plan development where a council, and I can work with Mark on that before we get the language in the paper, but I would hope to do an amendment to this section to just change the minimum, the maximum, and then change the section in the PUD density where it doesn't have to go to Board of Adjustment, if possible, where P&Z and council can approve that increase in density.
I mean, the 2,000 number seems reasonable to me.
I agree. I think that.
Motion?
Well, I mean, do you need it? Are you looking for a motion, Sal? Is that what?
Yeah, a motion to what to actually put in the code amendment.
I would move that we propose a code amendment to 2,000 unit, or 1 per 2,000 square feet.
Well, what we'll do is we'll obviously have the public hearing. We'll put it in the paper. I'm assuming maybe there'll be an article on this to actually get some people at the meeting next month, and we can always adjust that before we actually pass it at council.
Is walkability or sidewalk, is that any part of a density bonus currently, or?
There is, well, okay, no.
That's a separate issue.
Yeah, so if it's internal, if you're putting walkability where you're putting walking trails throughout your own development, yes, that can be a density bonus where you're having, so you put in a lake and a walking trail.
But connections through city sidewalks and
if you're
things
getting
in the
closer to downtown where it's more walkable, it doesn't necessarily become an issue because once you're in the C3 district, there is the density requirement doesn't apply. You can go to that, you can go above that 3,000, obviously everything downtown is. So once you're getting to the walkable amenities of the city, you don't necessarily need that density bonus because you're in the downtown area anyway, ideally. But I mean, I see you're saying you could include that to like parks, like Phoenix Park or something. But which I think you can take that into an intent. So say a planned residential multifamily development is planned behind Phoenix Park. Maybe you can say, well, just as in this case-by-case basis, because it's connecting to the walking trail of Phoenix Center and to Target, you know, people aren't going to be driving to buy their groceries, maybe they're walking. I would hope that that could be the prerogative of the commission and council to up that density because of its walkability.
Okay.
Again, make the density case by case when it comes to a planned development.
Right.
Okay. So if we put it at 2,000, then we have wiggle room depending on what's nearby and all the variables that we can figure out at that time. So I'll second Samantha's motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So move.
All right, I will draft it up and it'll be on your next agenda. I've been getting some calls about when the deadlines are for August. I don't know exactly what they are yet, but I'm assuming we should have a couple more items on there. We also had our first meeting. John, Tony, and Chuck and I met to discuss our master plan report card, I guess I'll call it, update. Again, we don't do any major changes to this unless we see it's necessary. At the 5-year, we do a 10-year, is typically when we actually contract out to have a new master plan. But what we're focusing on, and I'll schedule another one for more people if it makes it easier for more people to come. But updating our future street connections for where we actually want new roads to go, or if we've changed it now that development has progressed over the last 5 years, where we want these new connections to be. There's 2 on the southeast side of town that we've already pointed out that we want to add. And then also on the future land use map, if there's anything adjusted on that. The only thing that really came up was expanding our mixed use downtown. That has, with our TIFs, that has kind of expanded further than what our original master plan did, so kind of expanding that footprint. So maybe if someone wants to come in the future where they're just on the boundary of the C3, it may be appropriate for them to rezone to that mixed use and be in that new C3 district, that central business district. So we're kind of looking at expanding that. And then lastly, which is something I would like, we don't have to get together to do this, but I'll send it out as that list of objectives and goals to kind of go through and do a report card on what we think we're making progress on, what we're not. You'll go through there once I send it to you because it's kind of lengthy. There's a lot that doesn't necessarily apply to this commission. I mean, it gets into different department heads' goals, like public works and sewer connections, that kind of thing. Telecommunications is all wrapped in since this is a comprehensive plan. But as we go through, and I would like to kind of get a report card to submit to council and say, you know, here's where we think we're lacking on development. One thing that's sticking out to me is I think we've had some opportunities to implement sidewalks that we've missed out on, and that is walkability is one of the highest things listed in here as a priority, and pedestrian-friendly amenities. So I think those are things that we can kind of point out and say, look, we may have missed here. Let's, for the next 5 years, let's try and meet these objectives. And maybe we can even do a scoring of what we've, you know, if this commission wants to give council a scoring of where we think we're at, but.
That's good.
That's where we're at right now. I'll send out another email to everyone when we're going to meet next to finish update the connections, and then also do the report card, so.
This is one of the first time, and I've been on this quite a while, that we've really made steps, I think, for more affordable housing. And, you know, I want to keep the character of Washington, everybody does.
Right.
But we need to do something about it, and I feel like it's finally starting to happen.
Well, and I think, I think 2 things are happening. I mean, I think the stigma is changing a little bit. I don't think it's as necessarily of a fear, but I think more people are just wanting to rent longer, present company included. But I will say one of those objectives, and I think this could be difficult, but the last one is investigate the creation of residential zoning district which allows smaller lot sizes, which we've already done in the past. Since actually this was adopted, Darren did that. I think was one of the first ones to allow that 7,500 square foot lot. But it does mention for the multifamily higher quality architectural standards. That is something we've actually never done. Our PUD does allow us to require architectural standards, but we've never gotten into listing something like that. So if I think that would be something we could throw in to kind of counter the fear of it being low-income housing where it's going to look.
Just a box.
Yeah, it may not look aesthetically pleasing. You know, if you're going to go to a higher density, maybe that's something we can look at of implementing some type of architectural standards. you know, we'd have to,
It's the community.
yeah, I think we'd
be
have
great.
to actually get specific standards.
No.
I think we'd have to get,
I was waiting for that one.
I've got a comment once we go off the record.
I was waiting for that one.
yeah, but,
And I think, you know, you look at the development that's off High Street that was just done for the senior housing. Those are all full, I believe.
oh, they had a waiting list.
Yes. And so obviously there's a need. And it's, we're not being people out of town. It's people that needed that type of housing in town.
Sure.
So they're good people.
Yeah.
They're,
And they're moving out of a house on, you know, Stafford Street, for
Yeah.
example, and then a new family can come in and move. I mean,
Right.
we still have the inventory that we have. We just have so much of one type of it.
Well, and when you want, again, I think I may have already sent this to everyone, but the land use objectives, goals and objectives, number one are the ones I read, and then I think those are the ones this commission will look at the most. Number 7 is evaluate and determine the needs for life cycle, young adult through older adult housing. You know, I think we have definitely done a better job of the older adult. I mean, we've gotten some more senior housing, but then we have not come at it from both sides, so.
No.
Great job.
Any other comments or questions or, yeah?
I just got a quick comment, Tom. Hey, Sal, I've had like 20 people hit me on this, so I'm asking. The new urgent care, and doesn't have anything to do with it.
Total
I've got a lot of
Sign.
calls as well.
I'm sure you have.
It's the sign.
The sign. What, who,
How?
No, so.
Yeah,
Have a
because
sign.
that is not in compliance with code, is it?
It is. So
is.
The code allows up to 250 square feet and 50 feet tall when you are along Highway 47 or Highway 100 only. It actually calls out the highways in the code.
Okay.
They originally were going to do a monument sign. The brick matched the building. They asked, you know, hey, is this allowable? And they said, yeah, you're under the maximum. Well, the applicant didn't, but the sign manufacturer, who's knows a lot about sign codes, looked it up and saw, hey, you can actually go bigger. But if you look around, their other ones, they have that same
Okay.
that same
Here's my
style.
question,
So I'm
though,
wondering
is because that was a planned commercial development, though, was it?
right,
not?
but it has to meet, even though it's a planned commercial, it had to meet it even said in that ordinance, because they got a variance for, they requested a variance for the signs on the building the ones to be along the highway. Well, they wanted all 4 to be larger. The board required that only the 2 along the highway could be larger, the ones along the residential had to be smaller.
This was the Board of Adjustment?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then they put in there, you know, all other signs have to meet the requirements, which the 250.
Okay.
I mean, to me, it even blocks the next sign for the building behind it.
Yeah, for State Farm.
Right.
Yeah, I got a call while I was still on the crane. I mean,
I'm glad I didn't put that sign in.
Right.
so and I know that was the first thing we did is pull that permit and make sure, yep, they got one. They're actually,
Okay.
I think they're like 237, so they're a little bit below.
Okay, because but within the planned commercial development, I mean, isn't there some extra oversight on their signage? I mean, that's what I mean, of course they have to comply with code, but with that kind of planned commercial, it can be further restricted, can't it?
It could be if the council and the P&Z and council would have added those extra requirements, but if it's not specifically called out, they just have to meet the minimum in the code, and that's the minimum.
Okay, so maybe our bad.
Right, so.
I'd like to look into that as well.
New minimums or?
Yeah.
Well, you have maybe the sign be approved as part of the plan development.
Maximum.
Yeah, it wouldn't look as bad, or doesn't look as bad over on the.
Well, and the thing is, I think
big.
their signs were proposed as part of their building permit. They wrapped all that into one.
Because I know that sign did not come before us when we
No.
discussed their planned
No,
development.
typically signs don't, you know.
Well, and sometimes they do, though. I mean, in the past, we've talked about signage because we had one I specifically remember that they presented us with one type of sign and put a different type of sign up, and nothing was done. But
It's rare in a planned unit development to say, in this case, we want you to go below what the code allows. Normally, they're going to a planned development if they want to go above and beyond. So that's why we didn't even comment on it, because they weren't going above and beyond what the code would have required if they were C2. So,
Is that something to be revisited, though, is the size of the sign along those two highways and stuff, that,
I mean, we could amend that, yeah, for all future signs along 147.
so they
I
just
would-
don't stand out quite as
Right.
much as
Yeah,
that one
that's-
does. That one's in your face.
That would be there.
Right in your face, yeah.
Grandfather.
Well, and when you see their buildings, they have signs in the windows, huge.
And I wonder, when you come down Madison, you know, is that gonna be any,
It's not a sight distance issue. It's, I mean, it is tall enough. They actually lowered it. It was 10 feet taller.
Turned in
They lowered it,
from Snooks and Turtles.
but
It's pretty big.
Maybe they'll lower it.
Taking advertising to a whole new level.
it's tall enough where it's not a sight distance issue, so.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, maybe that's why they switched from a monument sign to that. They're worried about the monument sign needed to be further back. Because we don't have setbacks for a sign as long as you're not blocking anything visually. Well, a monument sign is automatically going to have to be set back further.
The computer place is close. The 6th and 47.
PC, Washington PC?
Yeah.
Wash PC.
When you're
Oh.
coming across, 47 signs out there, that's, I don't think it's in, I think it's okay, but that's close to
Right.
being in the sight distance, if you ever see.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, we haven't gotten a lot of calls about that.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot.
Anything else bring up? If not, I'll entertain one last motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Be quiet.
Yeah, right.
Hey, Mark, real quick.
Take care. And remind your better half that Wednesday is designed. If I try and take that opportunity.
Good job, Mark.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Oh, it's good to see you. I always look forward to